Hello, lovelies. You're listening to episode 6 of the Broken Enchantments podcast, written and read by Elizabeth Wheatley. That's me. I hope you enjoy this episode, and I would love to connect with you on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. You can check out the links below. Now let's get to the story. She should have left when Carlisle was still hanging from the tree. That was all Junior could think about as the day wore on and on. As if the world owed him something, he complained at every opportunity. He claimed the sun was too bright, riding the horse was too bumpy, the birds were too loud, the hills were too steep. For a time he even fixated on Seavan being too ugly to accompany them. That was where Junior took the most offense. Though she'd never told a soul, she'd long thought Seavan quite handsome. The midday sun was beating down on them, and the wooded hills had long since grown into mountains. The trees were scrunched close together on either side of the little group, almost forming a wall to enclose them. The path they followed was narrow, probably made by deer and other game. Grass grew so close to the path that the horse's legs brushed it with each step. "Can we stop?" Carlisle whined. "No," Junior retorted. "My bottom hurts from this saddle, and I think I'm getting blisters in some rather unseemly places." "Shut up." For several strides of the horse, Carlisle was silent. "Can we—" Junior lost control of her temper and elbowed him as hard as she could. "Ow!" Carlisle screamed. "Carlisle," Seavan called back from his place at the head of their column. Seavan called back from his place in front of them. "If you refuse to cease antagonizing the lady, you will be forced to walk." "Lady?" Carlisle mockingly asked. "What lady? I don't see any lady, just this thing." Junior growled unintelligibly. "A lady would apologize for elbowing me," Carlisle whined. Gritting her teeth, Junior decided it was the fastest way to silence him. "I apologize for hitting you, Carlisle." "Well, at least she apologizes. You know, that's the first—" "Silence," Seavan hissed abruptly. "Oh no, not you too." Seavan turned a menacing glare in the direction of Carlisle, and the young enchanter decided to obey. They halted in a small clearing, no more than 3 sword lengths wide. The elf sat perched on his mare, listening intently. Silent as an owl landing in a tree, Seavan swung off his horse and briefly motioned that they were to stay where they were. He slipped between 2 saplings and vanished into the greenery. Junior could feel Colbo tensing. Whatever it was, the stallion sensed it too. Once Seavan was presumably out of earshot, Carlisle could barely contain his excitement. "What do you think it is?" His voice had a childlike eagerness to it. "Seavan will tell us when he returns." Junior was quite content to let Seavan do the scouting. Carlisle fidgeted, but must have decided that he would rather not risk a fall from Colbo's towering height. He held on to Junier's waist and contented himself with humming and squirming like a child. In front of them, Seavan's mare swished her tail calmly. Small white ears flicked, listening for the return of her master. Eventually, the mare dropped her head and tore up a mouthful of tender shoots, but not once did she move to stray from the path. After a few moments, Junior had to resist the urge to squirm along with Carlisle. She looked up at the sky, counting the fluffy white outlines of clouds. A flash of motion caught her eye as Seavan slid from the trees. The elf held a finger to his lips and sprang almost silently for his mount. He swung up into the saddle and led them onwards along the game trail. The look on the elf's face was enough to inspire quiet, even from Carlisle. They continued on in silence, save for the clop of the horse's hooves on the beaten dirt. Seavan urged them onwards into a trot, and they stepped up the pace, wending their way through the trees along the narrow path. A sense of foreboding settled over them. Janir didn't dare speak until she knew what was happening, what Seovan had found. Fear locked her jaw, making the thought of words preposterous. The land began to rise at a steeper and steeper slant. Eventually, it became clear that they were scaling the sides of one of the great colossuses that made up the Gideon Mountains. The horses came onto a narrow track that leveled out suddenly. The trees gave way on one side, offering a plain view to the front of the mountain. Shivers shot through her when she internalized how far down it was, or how high up they had gone. Rocks slid underneath Kalbo's hooves, skipping down the mountainside as if to show her just how far one could fall. It took an uneasy amount of time for them to leave the gravel and reach the other side of the mountain, where it was grassier. The horses clopped deeper into the mountains, traversing at an angle along the steep slope. Seovan led the way to a meadow with wiry dead grass, reining in his steed beside them. "We can slow a little from here," he said. "We should be all right for now." "What did you find?" Janir found her voice at last. Seovan shook his head. "A camp from the look of it. Very odd. Soldiers from Slavin, if I had to guess." A hard lump formed in Janir's throat. "Soldiers?" "Try not to worry," he said. "There's nothing we can do about it right now." Janir wished it was that simple. There were so many questions and so many fears swirling around her skull. Not only were Brevia's age-old rivals towing the border for the first time in nearly 2 decades, but there was the matter of the Argatolums, Karail's key of Amatons, her killing of Duke Ronan, and Armandius. Armandius was probably the one she feared for the most. As far as she knew, no word had come on what the other High Lords had decided to do with him. One half of her said that they would not harm the last remaining member of the Third House. The Pact of the Seven Swords had stood for millennia. Surely they wouldn't break it now. The other half of her said that Armandius had hidden an Argatolum. Even his peers would not look favorably upon that transgression. Kalbo and Laristi walked side by side for a few hours after that. They carried their riders out of the meadow and ventured into the trees, continuing higher up into the mountains. The steep slopes with their tall grasses and treeless landscapes blended into a single image in Janir's mind as the air grew cooler. At least 20 miles from where Seovan had gone to scout, he announced that they should stop for the night. The horses were tired, and so were their riders. They made their camp near an outcrop of trees at the top of a slope overlooking the valley below. Although they could see for leagues, there was no sign of anyone chasing them. Janir pulled her sleeves just a little farther over her arms. The elf chose this spot because of the view they had on 3 out of 4 sides. Janir protested that it merely meant other people could see their fire from 3 sides, but Seovan told her they would have ample warning if anyone did try to approach them. All the same, he seemed quite certain that none of the Slavish soldiers even knew they had passed. Seovan was distracted, thinking deep inside himself. Janir didn't question him again as they unsaddled the horses. They cleaned a brace of leverets Seovan had caught and built a fire, all the while the trio barely exchanged a word. Karail was content to keep quiet for once, observing the other pair and ogling the cooking meat. The 3 of them sat waiting for supper. Karail fixated on the roasting young rabbits. Seovan stared meditatively into the flames, and Janir waited for someone to say something. "I'm going to have to leave you, Janir," Seovan said with reluctance. "Why?" was all she could manage to reply. Fear and a sudden wave of cleanness surged through her, far more than just the usual disappointment she felt whenever he left Castle Kayerson with his father. "You're in the mountains now, and I must inform the Brevians of the Slavish band that is here." He took a deep breath. "Also, I must tell my people of the Argatolum's search for the key of Amatons." "You believe him?" Janir couldn't wholly keep the incredulity out of her voice as she gestured to Karail. The enchanter pouted indignantly and folded his arms across his chest. "Your display of confidence is overwhelming." "He has not lied," Seovan said, ignoring the enchanter altogether. "And he's only slightly mad. The Argatolums are indeed after the relic, then they must be stopped. Junior bit her lip. Seovan and Carl hated what she was so much. It could become dangerous or even fatal for her if they found out. She honestly wasn't sure what they would do. Misinterpreting her expression, he offered consolation. I am certain Armandius has worked things out and that you will be able to return to Greenhaven soon. Smiling faintly, Junior wanted to change the subject but couldn't think of anything. He was under the impression her exile was because she had killed a nobleman. When he returned to the lowlands, he would almost certainly learn better. What am I to do? Junior choked. Where am I supposed to go? Stay in the mountains, Seovan replied. I will return for you as soon as I can, Junior, I swear. He cast her a long, meaningful look. Junior didn't want his promises, she wanted him to stay. All the same, she did her best not to show how upset she truly was. Keep a low profile, and avoid all other travelers when possible. You should be alone in these parts. Seovan hesitated. He was probably thinking about the slavish band he had seen earlier today. I will return within a day and a half at most. He shot a glance to his slim white mare, probably deciding how fast he could press her. Watch for the weirwargs. If you move every other night or so, they should not find you. If they do, remember that they fear water, and stay away from cliffs. Griffins may be nesting there. Junior nodded, storing away his advice. Not that he needed to tell her half of it. As inept as she was at the actual sport, she had learned a great deal from hunting with Armandius. Will you know where to find me? She ventured. He gave her a sideways glance. I am an elf, was his simple reply. I can usually find anything and anyone in creation, as long as I know who or what I am searching for. Junior had forgotten that. Stress was probably prioritizing memories. Though, Seovan's brow crinkled, I did have a slight bit of trouble finding you this time. I could not feel you at all. I must be getting lax. The elf seemed to genuinely believe it was his own mistake, or so she hoped. It hardly matters. If I happen to err again, I can do what I did this time and search for Colbo. If only he knew. Junior couldn't look him in the eye for a moment. I'll stay with her, Carl volunteered. We can't leave her alone now, can we? Seovan watched Carl carefully but didn't protest. Whatever the case, he must see something in the boy to make him trust he wasn't a threat to Junior. She just hoped Seovan would be back soon. The last thing she wanted was to be alone in these mountains with hostile soldiers. And Carl. Seovan left them the next morning. May the sun, moon, and stars guide you until we meet again, he said as he turned his white mount toward the lowlands. Unmoving, Junior watched him gallop into the trees while Carl chattered about something she wasn't listening to. Even though Carl's voice was running in the background, she felt suddenly alone, naked on the hillside. Everything she had come to depend on for safety and protection was gone. She wondered if this was how fledgling birds felt when left on their own for the first time. Bracing herself to face the enchanter, Junior turned in the direction of Carl and Colbo. Carl was beside Colbo on his tiptoes, trying to heft the horse's saddle onto his withers. What are you doing? Junior demanded. Saddling him? Why? We can let him rest for another hour or so. Now get away from my horse. Carl grunted as the saddle finally reached its desired altitude. Because if we are going to find the key of Amatons before those blasted Argotolums, we had better start moving. And I don't want to carry the saddle, do you? Who said we were going? Junior demanded, moving to stop him. Why don't we just stay here and let people much more qualified than us deal with it, whatever it is? You don't understand, do you, Junior? Carl sighed and sounded remotely sane for a change. He even took a step back from Colbo. By the time Seovan reaches the lowlands, tells the story, assembles a group to go after the key, the group is ready to move. The Argotolums could have found it a dozen times over. They have a head start on us. Carl looked suddenly more serious than she had seen him in the few days of their acquaintance. It was very unnerving. Why should I care? Demanded Junior. You and Seven kept talking about nearly unlimited power, but you never explained yourselves. Cariel sighed. Do you remember the story of Amatons, the great savior of the world? Junior blinked at him. Amatons the Enchanter? Yes, do you remember it? Of course. Everyone knows the story of the beasts he defeated and the war and so on and so forth, she shortly replied. The tale had been dismantled and reassembled by so many artists, bards, and poets, it was hard to keep track of them all. One thing she was sure of, though. There's nothing in the stories about any key. Not many people know the whole of the story, explained Carlyle. The knowledge of his defeated foes, the enchanter contained in an orb and kept for himself. It was lost to our realms when he sailed across the sea. And the point is? Junior wasn't so sure she believed any of this, but Seovan had seemed to trust at least part of it. I haven't told you what he did with the other thing he took from this race, Carlyle qualified, impatient at her impatience. Their magic. The enchanter paused, probably for dramatic effect. Junior raised one eyebrow. What about their magic? He sealed it in a crystal chamber, and if anyone can stand inside the chamber, they can absorb the power of an entire race. Carlyle was either horrified or enthused. It was hard to tell which. Junior was still not impressed. And what does this key have to do with anything? Carlyle sighed and made a frustrated grunt. You need the key to open the chamber. Instant suspicion came over Junior. What exactly would you want with this key if you had it? Hide it from the Argotolums. I would never use it, he assured her. How would you keep it from the fiercest band of warriors ever to walk the earth? Junior demanded. You're one boy, and even if you had all the magic in the world, it would be useless against Argotolums. They're called invulnerables for a reason. The enchanter was quiet for some time before admitting, I don't know. Junior huffed and folded her arms across her chest. But that's not important right now. We just need to keep it from them until we can hide it again. No, was her firm response. Come on, Junior, Carlyle pleaded. No. Please. It's just outside the province of Ivydown, not 3 days' ride away. Conveniently, the province which happens to border with the Staspin Waste, Junior muttered to herself. Listen, Carlyle sounded almost desperate. I can't do this alone. I need you, Junior. Terrible things will happen if the Argotolums get this key first. I want nothing to do with Argotolums, Junior snapped. If there really are invulnerables on the loose, then Seovan will know how to deal with them. We wait until he returns. We'll be there and gone before they ever arrive, Carlyle assured her. You said they had a head start. True, but they don't know where the key is. I do. How could you possibly know? Junior marched around to where her bedroll was lying and began lashing it up. If nothing else, perhaps being on the move would keep the enchanter quiet. Colbo's ears twitched. He turned his head in the direction of the woods. Junior followed his stare, remembering something Armandius had once told her about heeding Colbo's reactions. At first she saw nothing, but then she caught the flash of harness and a flicker of motion as a saddled horse moved by. Carlyle? Junior was lucky they didn't have many supplies. She grabbed everything in sight and crammed it haphazardly into the saddlebags. What's wrong? Carlyle stared with confusion as she lashed the bags shut and nearly threw them at him. Shh. Junior waved indistinctly as she shoved him in the direction of Colbo. Just... For once, the enchanter had done something useful. Carlyle had mostly tacked up Colbo, and Junior just had to tighten a few buckles. She slipped the bridle in place over the stallion's head, moving with fevered speed. Finish packing, she hissed. What's... Carlyle followed her anxious gaze. Oh, fumets. He raced to obey her as the first signs of the riders appeared from the trees. Bloody Slavish found us. The girl and the enchanter slung the saddlebags up behind the saddle just as the first horseman emerged from the greenery. By the time they had been spotted, Junior was already vaulting onto the stallion's back and hauling Carlyle up after her. As the riders shouted and made to chase them, Junior froze. Seovan had been wrong. These were not Slavish at all. It had been years, but she could recognize one when she saw one, could feel that indescribable knowing. These were Argotolums. Panic gripped Junior for a moment, and she couldn't think, couldn't react. They'd come for her. They were here. After all this time, hoping it would never happen, they were here. "What are you doing?" Carlisle shrieked. He drove his skinny heels into Kolbo's sides just as the lead riders took off after them. Argotolum riders. Junior recovered enough of her senses to steer Kolbo in the opposite direction. The stallion gave a burst of speed, moving like a bolt of lightning despite carrying an extra rider. As they galloped through the trees, the thunder of pursuit on their heels, Junior tried to steer Kolbo in the direction Seovan had gone, if she could just get back to him. But there were at least 5 Argotolums after them, and the warriors closed in, keeping them from doubling back. Abandoning all hope of meeting up with Seovan, Junior dug her heels into Kolbo's sides and spurred him deeper into the mountains. Speed was their only chance. This has been the Broken Enchantments podcast. Thank you for listening. Check out my Patreon for early access to episodes, bonus content, and lots of patrons-only freebies. You can learn more at elizabethwheatley.com. And don't forget to subscribe. See you next time.